The Arizona sun hammered down like a blacksmith's anvil as Jake Morrison guided his horse across the hard-pan desert. 2 years of ranching had taught him to read this land like scripture. But today, something felt wrong. Dead wrong. His mare, Sergeant, named for his cavalry days, snorted nervously. Animals sense things men tried to ignore. Jake's weathered hands tightened on the reins as he spotted them in the distance. Wooden stakes driven into the earth, forming a perfect square in the middle of nowhere. No cattle tracks led to it. No reason for anyone to be out here except trouble. Jake dismounted, his boots hitting the sand with the soft crunch that marked every step in this God-forsaken country. The Winchester rifle felt familiar across his back. 36 inches of American steel that had kept him breathing through more firefights than he cared to count. His Colt .45 Peacemaker rode heavy on his hip, loaded with 6 rounds that could put a man down permanent. As he drew closer, the stakes revealed their purpose. A woman hung against the wooden frame, her body barely holding itself upright. Dark hair fell across sunburned features. Apache by the look of her. Young, maybe 25. But it was the silver and turquoise around her neck that made Jake's blood run cold. That wasn't prisoner jewelry. That was chieftain family. She lifted her head as his shadow fell across her. Fierce eyes stared at him with a look that wasn't gratitude. It was calculation. Even dying of thirst, she was measuring him for a coffin. "Water!" she rasped, the word coming out like sandpaper on wood. Jake pulled his canteen, but kept his distance. 2 years ago, he trusted too quick. Come home to find his wife Sarah and boy Tommy scattered across their front porch like broken dolls. Apache war paint on the fence posts. The memory hit him like a fist to the gut, but he pushed it down. This woman wasn't them. She was just another soul the desert was trying to claim. He stepped forward with the canteen. That's when she struck. The hidden knife came from nowhere, slicing air where his throat had been a heartbeat before. Jake jerked back, water spilling across the sand as his hand went instinctively to his gun. "Easy there, miss." His voice carried the calm authority of a man who'd faced down Confederate cavalry charges. "I'm trying to help." She laughed, bitter as alkali water. "Help? You people don't help. You take. You use. You kill." Her English was perfect, educated. This wasn't some raiding party survivor. This was something else entirely. "Who are you?" Jake demanded, keeping his distance now. "I am Ayanna, daughter of Chief Mankato." The words hit Jake like lightning. Mankato, the name every rancher and soldier in the territory knew. The Apache war leader who'd kept 3 companies of cavalry dancing to his tune for the better part of 5 years. "Then what in hell are you doing tied up out here like bait?" Her calculating gaze never wavered. "Because I let them capture me. I needed to see their plans, their weapons, their numbers." She gestured at her bonds with contempt. But being left to die in the desert wasn't part of the arrangement. Jake felt the pieces clicking together like shells loading into a rifle chamber. "You're a spy." "I was. Now I'm just another dead woman unless you cut these ropes." The sound of horses carried across the desert before Jake could respond. Dust clouds on the horizon, moving fast. Multiple riders, and they weren't coming for a social call. Jake's knife made quick work of the rope around her wrists. Ayanna collapsed as her weight hit her legs, but she was up again in seconds, testing her limbs like a warrior checking weapons before battle. "How many?" she asked, scanning the approaching dust. 6, maybe 8. Jake's eyes were already calculating distance, cover, odds. "Can you ride?" She answered by vaulting onto Sergeant's back behind him. No wasted words. No feminine weakness, just pure survival instinct honed to a killing edge. Jake spurred the horse hard, and they were moving before the riders crested the ridge. Behind them came shouts, the crack of rifle fire, bullets whining past like angry hornets. Jake kept low in the saddle, one arm steadying Ayanna as Sergeant stretched out in full gallop across the broken ground. The voice that carried over the gunfire made Jake's blood freeze. "That's Jake Morrison, Iron Jake Morrison, from Mesa Ridge. Colonel Hayes." Jake would know that Kentucky drawl in his sleep, the same voice that had promised protection for the settlers 2 years back. The same voice that had arrived 3 hours too late to save Sarah and Tommy. Too late, hell. Hayes had known, had to have known. "You know him?" Ayanna shouted over the wind. "We have history." Jake's jaw was granite. Bad history. A rifle bullet spanged off a rock near Sergeant's hooves. The mare stumbled, but kept running, foam flying from her muzzle. She was cavalry trained, bred for this kind of work, but she was carrying double weight across killing ground. Ahead, the land opened up into a maze of arroyos and stone formations. Devil's Canyon country. Jake had scouted this terrain during his Army days, back when the war with the Apache was just getting started. If they could reach the rocks, they might have a chance. Another shot, closer this time. Jake felt rather than heard the bullet part the air near his ear. Professional shooting. Military shooting. "There!" Ayanna pointed toward a narrow gap between two red stone walls. "The canyon. We can lose them in the maze." Jake guided Sergeant into the opening just as the pursuit rounded the last ridge. The canyon walls rose up on both sides, blocking out the sun, dropping the temperature 20 degrees in an instant. Sound bounced off stone in strange ways here. Hoofbeats and breathing multiplied into a ghostly cavalry charge. They rode hard for maybe half a mile before Jake pulled up in a wider section where an old rockfall had created natural cover. He slid from the saddle, Winchester already in his hands, and moved to where he could watch their back trail. Ayanna was beside him without being asked, checking the loads in a Colt Navy she'd somehow acquired during their escape. Her movements were smooth, professional. This wasn't her first gunfight. "Morrison!" Hayes' voice rang through the rocks. "I know you're in there. Send out the squaw and you can ride away." Jake's finger tightened on the trigger. "Like hell." "Think about it, Morrison. This doesn't concern you. This is military business." "Military business?" Jake called back. "That what you called it when you left my family to die?" Silence stretched like a held breath. When Hayes spoke again, his tone had changed. Colder, harder. "That's ancient history, Morrison. This here is about the future, about progress, about what's best for the territory." "What's best?" Ayanna's voice cut like a blade. "You mean the silver mine on our land? The one you think nobody knows about?" More silence. Then Hayes laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Smart girl. Too smart for her own good. That mine's going to fund a lot of progress, miss. Build a lot of schools and churches. Bring a lot of civilization to this wilderness." His voice hardened. "Whether your people want it or not." A chill ran down Jake's spine. "How long have you known? About the silver?" "Long enough to make arrangements. Long enough to ensure the Apache problem gets solved permanently." The realization hit Jake like a physical blow. Sarah and Tommy hadn't died in a random raid. They'd been murdered because they'd stumbled onto something, seen something, known something. "You bastard," Jake whispered. Then louder, "You murdering bastard! Watch your tongue, Morrison. I'm still a colonel in the United States Army. You're a killer wearing a uniform." Jake's voice bounced off the canyon walls. "And killers need killing." The shooting started again, but this time Jake was ready. His Winchester spoke 3 times, fast and accurate. Somewhere in the rocks, a man screamed, then another. Hayes' boys were learning the difference between target practice and fighting a man who'd survived Antietam and Gettysburg. Ayanna's Colt barked twice, and Jake heard the distinctive sound of a ricochet, followed by cursing. She knew how to use that gun. "How many rounds?" Jake asked during a lull. 4 left. "You?" 8 in the rifle, 6 in the Colt. Jake calculated rapidly. Not enough if they rush us. They won't rush. Not yet. Hayes is too careful, too smart. Ayana's dark eyes were scanning the canyon walls above them. But he'll find another way in. He always does. You know him? My father does business with him. Did business before we learned what kind of man he really was. Her voice carried old pain. Hayes has been selling guns to both sides, Apache and cavalry, keeping the war going so he could strip the land clean. The pieces of the puzzle fell into place. That's why you were spying, to find proof, to find the weapons, to find the silver, to find the truth. She looked at him directly. I found all three. The question is whether we live long enough to use what I learned. A new sound drifted through the canyon, horses, coming from the opposite direction. Hayes had split his force, sent men around to cut off their escape. Jake checked his Winchester one more time. 8 rounds. If each shot counted, if his luck held, if Hayes didn't have more men than Jake thought, too many ifs. But sometimes a man had to play the hand he was dealt, even when the cards were marked against him. You ready for this? He asked Ayana. She smiled then. And for the first time, Jake saw the warrior underneath the diplomat. I've been ready my whole life. The sound of approaching hoofbeats grew louder. The first shot came from above. Jake rolled left as the bullet spanged off the rock where he'd been standing, bringing up the Winchester in one fluid motion. 20 yards up the canyon wall, muzzle flash marked a sniper's position. High and right, Ayana called out, her weapon tracking movement in the rocks. Jake put 2 rounds into the crevice, heard a grunt of pain and the clatter of a falling rifle. 1 down. How many left? Hoofbeats thundered from both ends of the canyon now. Hayes had played it smart, boxing them in like rats in a grain bin. But Jake had been trapped before, in a Confederate prison camp outside Richmond, where the guards had more guns and less mercy than Hayes could dream of. He'd walked out of that hell on his own 2 feet, and he intended to walk out of this one the same way. Cave, Ayana said, pointing to a dark opening in the canyon wall. 20 feet. Can you cover me? Jake didn't hesitate. His rifle sent a steady stream of fire toward both ends of the canyon, while Ayana sprinted across the open ground, moving like smoke across water. She reached the cave entrance and immediately waved him over. Jake followed, reloading on the run. Military discipline beaten into his bones by 4 years of war. Never run with an empty gun. Never turn your back on the enemy unless you had someone watching it for you. The cave was deeper than it looked from outside. Dark as a grave, but with the kind of darkness that meant safety from prying eyes and rifle bullets. Jake followed Ayana into the black, one hand on the stone wall, Winchester ready. How far back does this go? He whispered. Far enough. Apache children play in these caves. I know every tunnel, every passage. Her voice came from somewhere ahead of him in the dark. But that's not what you need to see. Light flared as she struck a match. The flame revealed a chamber maybe 20 feet across, carved out of solid rock by centuries of water flow. But it was what filled the chamber that made Jake's blood run cold. Wooden crates, dozens of them, stenciled with U.S. Army markings. And in the dancing matchlight, Jake could read the labels. Springfield rifles, Spencer carbines, and in the corner, the distinctive shape of a Gatling gun, its brass fittings gleaming like gold. Sweet Jesus, Jake breathed. Hayes has been stockpiling weapons for months, selling them to Apache war parties, then using the attacks to justify bringing in more troops. More weapons, more money from Washington. Ayana's voice was bitter as alkali water. Blood money, all of it. Jake moved to one of the open crates. Inside, Spencer rifles lay nested like sleeping snakes. Enough firepower to arm a company of cavalry. or a war party big enough to wipe out every ranch and settlement between here and Tucson. A figure stepped out from the shadows at the back of the cave. Jake's hand went to his gun, then stopped. "Tommy Martinez," Jake breathed. "What the hell are you doing here?" Tommy Coyote. Martinez had guided Jake through Apache territory more times than either man could count. Half Mexican, half Apache, all survivor. But the rifle in his hands was pointed at Jake's chest. "Sorry, amigo," Tommy said, his voice heavy with regret. "Hayes pays better than friendship." But as Tommy raised the rifle, his eyes caught sight of the weapon's cache. His face went pale. "Madre de Dios," he whispered. "Jake, I didn't know about this. Hayes told me it was just about catching one Apache spy." Ayanna stepped forward. "Look around, Tommy. Look at what your employer really is." Tommy's hands shook as he lowered the rifle. "A massacre. He's planning a massacre." "Tomorrow at dawn," Ayanna confirmed. Tommy was quiet for a long moment. Then he shouldered his rifle and moved to stand beside Jake. "Hayes can keep his money," he said. "Some things cost too much." The match burned down to Ayanna's fingers and died, plunging them back into darkness. But Jake could still see those rifles in his mind, could see Hayes' plan laid out like a battle map. Clean, simple, effective, and wrong as murder. "Why show me this?" Jake asked. "Because tomorrow at dawn, Hayes is going to attack my father's village. He's going to use these weapons to arm a rescue party of civilian volunteers. Make it look like vigilante justice instead of military action." She met his eyes in the darkness. "And when it's over, every Apache man, woman, and child will be dead, and Hayes will have his silver mine." "How many people in your father's village?" Jake asked. 200, maybe more. Mostly old men, women, children. The warriors are out on patrol, scattered across 50 miles of territory. They won't be back until tomorrow night." Jake did the math. 200 innocents against Hayes and however many guns he could buy or bully into service. It wouldn't even be a fight. It would be a slaughter. There has to be a way to warn them. There is, but it means going through Hayes' men, through the desert, through country where every shadow could hide a rifle. Ayanna's voice was steady, but Jake could hear the weight in it. And it means trusting each other, really trusting, because if one of us breaks, we both die. Jake considered what Sarah and Tommy would say about getting involved in other people's wars. Then he remembered Sarah's last words, gasped out with her dying breath. "Promise me, no more innocent blood." "What do you need from me?" he said. Another match flared, and in its light, Ayanna smiled. Not the cold smile of a diplomat or the bitter smile of a prisoner. The smile of a warrior who just found an unexpected ally. "I need you to be the soldier you used to be, just for one more day." Before Jake could answer, voices drifted from the cave mouth. Hayes' men getting closer, getting braver. "Morrison, we know you're in there. Come on out and we'll make it quick." Jake checked his weapons one more time. 6 rounds left in the Winchester, 6 in the Colt. Not much, but it had to be enough. "There's another way out," Ayanna whispered. "Tunnel in the back leads to a ravine half a mile downstream, but we have to move now." "Tommy?" Jake asked. The half-breed scout nodded. "I know the way. Follow me." They went deeper into the cave, feeling their way through passages barely wide enough for a man's shoulders. Behind them, Jake could hear Hayes' men entering the chamber, their voices filling the stone space. "Look at this," one of them said. "Weapons cache." "Colonel's going to want to see this," said another. Then Hayes himself, his Kentucky drawl unmistakable. "Well, I'll be damned. Our little Apache princess has been busy." Jake, Ayanna, and Tommy kept moving, deeper into the mountain's heart. The tunnel twisted and turned, sometimes so narrow they had to crawl, sometimes opening up into chambers where their breathing whispered like ghosts. Finally, a glimmer of light ahead. Real light. Daylight. They emerged into a narrow ravine, maybe 4 feet wide, with walls of red stone rising 30 feet on either side. A trickle of water ran along the bottom. Not much, but enough to keep a man alive if he was careful. "Where does this lead?" Jake asked. "North, toward my father's village, but also toward the main road, where Hayes will have patrols." Ayanna studied the sun's position. 3 hours of daylight left. If we move fast, stay low, we might make it. They started walking, staying in the shadow of the ravine walls. Jake's boots squelched in the muddy bottom, but the sound was covered by the whisper of wind through the rocks above. "Tell me about your father," Jake said after they had walked in silence for maybe half an hour. "Chief Mankato, 62 years old, fought in more battles than most men have seen sunrises. But he's also a diplomat, a peacemaker. He wants to find a way for our people to survive without endless war." Ayanna's voice carried pride and worry in equal measure. "That's why he sent me to spy on Hayes. To find a way to make peace from a position of strength. And instead you found out Hayes never intended to make peace at all." "Exactly. The silver mine changes everything. Hayes doesn't want to negotiate with the Apache. He wants to eliminate us." Jake processed that as they walked. The difference between soldiers and killers, between war and murder. He'd seen enough of both to know which was which. "What's your real plan?" he asked finally. Ayanna stopped walking and looked at him. "What do you mean? You're Chief's daughter. You've been planning this for months. You don't just stumble into a weapons cache by accident. You knew it was there." Jake met her fierce stare. "So what's the real plan?" For a moment, he didn't think she'd answer. Then she smiled that warrior smile again. "Tomorrow morning, when Hayes and his men ride out to attack our village, they're going to find it empty. Everyone will be gone, scattered to the four winds. And when they get back to their camp, they're going to find their weapons missing too. Because? Because while they're chasing ghosts, a small team of Apache warriors is going to blow that cave to hell and gone, with everything in it." Jake felt a grin tugging at his own mouth, including Hayes' evidence of Apache weapon stockpiling. Including that, no weapons, no evidence, no excuse for a massacre. Her expression grew serious. "But it only works if someone warns my father in time, and if someone makes sure Hayes doesn't change his plans." "Someone meaning me. Someone meaning you." Tommy spoke up from behind them. "Count me in too, amigo. I got blood debts to pay." Jake considered it all. The odds, the risks, the likely consequences. What Sarah would have said about getting involved in other people's wars. Then he remembered her last words. "Promise me, no more innocent blood." "All right," Jake said. "I'm in." The sound of rifle fire drifted from somewhere behind them, the reports bouncing off stone walls like thunder. Hayes' men, probably shooting at shadows, but it meant they'd found the tunnel, meant time was running out fast. "How far to your father's village?" Jake asked. 5 miles, maybe 6. Ayanna looked at the sun again. "We can make it by dark if we hurry." They hurried. Chief Mankato's village sat in a natural amphitheater carved out of red rock, hidden from casual view but defensible from multiple directions. Smoke rose from cook fires, and the sound of children playing drifted on the evening air. It looked peaceful, too peaceful for what was coming. Jake followed Ayanna down a narrow trail that seemed to appear and disappear with each step. Apache engineering, designed to confuse enemies and hide friends. By the time they reached the village floor, full darkness had settled over the desert like a black blanket. Chief Mankato emerged from the largest teepee as they approached. Jake's first impression was of a man carved from the same red rock that surrounded them. Tall, weathered, with dark eyes that had seen too much and hands that had done what was necessary. War chief and diplomat both, just as Ayanna had said. The old man spoke in rapid Apache, Ayanna answered in the same language, her words coming fast and urgent. Jake caught his own name mentioned several times, along with what sounded like a string of Apache curses that would have made a cavalry sergeant proud. Finally, Chief Mankato turned to Jake and spoke in perfect English. "My daughter tells me you wish to help us. Why?" "Because Hayes killed my family 2 years ago. Because he's planning to kill yours tomorrow. Because some things are wrong no matter who does them." Mankato studied him for a long moment. "You are Iron Jake Morrison. I have heard of you. You fought well in the white man's war." "I fought. Don't know how well. Well enough to survive. Well enough to earn respect from enemies." The chief gestured toward his teepee. "Come, we have much to discuss and little time to discuss it." Inside the teepee, by the light of a small fire, Mankato spread out a map drawn on tanned hide. It showed the territory for 50 miles in every direction, marked with symbols Jake couldn't read but somehow understood. Water sources, trails, defensive positions. "Hayes will attack at dawn," Mankato said. "He will bring 50 men, maybe more. Volunteers from the settlements, cavalry deserters, anyone who will fight for silver mine profits." The old chief's finger traced a line across the map. "They will approach from the south, through Devil's Canyon." "How do you know all this?" Jake asked. Mankato smiled. "Because I have been fighting Hayes for 5 years. I know how he thinks, how he plans, how he kills." The smile faded. "But this time is different. This time he has enough men and guns to finish what he started." "Not if we're ready for him." "We?" Mankato's eyebrows rose. "You would fight beside Apache against your own people?" Jake considered that, about skin color and blood loyalty and all the things men use to divide themselves from each other. Then he thought about Sarah and Tommy, and about right and wrong. "They stopped being my people when they started murdering innocents for money." Mankato nodded slowly. "Then you are welcome in this fight, Iron Jake Morrison. But understand, if we lose, we all die. Hayes cannot afford to leave witnesses. Then we don't lose." The planning took 2 hours. Evacuation routes for the women and children. Defensive positions for the warriors who would stay behind to sell their lives dearly. Signals and fallback positions and all the grim mathematics of desperate battle. But as dawn approached, Jake began to realize something was wrong. The evacuation was taking too long. Too many people trying to move through too few escape routes. Children crying, old people stumbling in the dark. "They're not going to make it," he told Ayanna. She knew it too. He could see it in her face, in the set of her shoulders. "My father won't leave anyone behind, and there are too many who can't move fast enough." "Then we buy them more time." "How?" Jake was already moving, checking his weapons, filling his pockets with extra ammunition. "By giving Hayes something else to think about." He found Chief Mankato directing the evacuation near the village's north entrance. The old warrior looked up as Jake approached, and something passed between them without words. The understanding of soldiers who knew what had to be done. "How long do you need?" Jake asked. 2 hours. "Maybe 3. Jake calculated rapidly. Dawn was maybe an hour away. Hayes would attack with the first light, when his men could see their targets, but the Apache would still be half blind from sleep. "I can give you 1 hour, Jake said. "Maybe 90 minutes if I'm lucky." Mankato gripped his shoulder. "That is all we can ask. That is more than we had a right to hope for." Jake turned to leave, then stopped. "If I don't make it back, you will make it back." Ayanna's voice came from behind him. "Because I'm going with you." "Like hell you are." "This is my fight too, Iron Jake Morrison. My people, my responsibility." She checked the loads in her Colt one more time. "Besides, you'll need someone who knows the ground." Jake started to argue, then saw something in her fierce stare that reminded him of Sarah. The same stubborn courage that wouldn't bend, wouldn't break, wouldn't step aside when principle was at stake. "All right," he said, "but we do this my way." They left the village as the first pale hint of dawn touched the eastern sky. Moving fast but quiet, following trails only an Apache could see in the pre-dawn darkness. Within half an hour, they could hear Hayes's column approaching through Devil's Canyon. Horses, men, weapons. The sound of an army on the march. Jake found his position on a ridge overlooking the canyon mouth. Perfect field of fire, good escape routes, natural cover from return fire. A sniper's dream. Ayanna took a position 50 yards away, where she could watch his flanks and cover his retreat. Professional, efficient, like they'd been fighting together for years instead of hours. The first riders appeared just as the sun broke the horizon. Hayes himself in the lead, his cavalry uniform bright with brass buttons and gold braid. Behind him came 50 men on horseback, armed with everything from military rifles to shotguns and pistols. Not soldiers, killers. The kind of men who'd murder sleeping families for mine shares. Jake let them get halfway through the canyon before he opened fire. His first shot took Hayes's lieutenant clean out of the saddle, the man's scream ringing through the rocks. The second shot scattered the lead riders as their horses reared and plunged. The third shot put Hayes himself on the ground, wounded but not dead. Then Ayanna's colt joined the symphony, and suddenly the canyon was full of gun smoke and dying horses, and men scrambling for cover that didn't exist. Jake worked his rifle like a machine, each shot placed with surgical precision. A man aiming a rifle at Ayanna's position, another trying to organize a charge up the canyon wall, a third attempting to ride back for reinforcements. For 10 minutes, maybe 15, it was a perfect ambush. Hayes's men pinned down in the kill zone, unable to advance or retreat, taking casualties they couldn't afford. But then the return fire began to tell. Bullets sparked off the rocks around Jake's position, forcing him to keep his head down. Professional shooting, military shooting. "Jake!" Ayanna's voice carried over the gunfire. "Movement on the left! They're flanking us!" Jake saw them then. A squad of Hayes's men, working their way up the canyon wall using a trail he'd missed. In 5 minutes, they'd be in position to pour fire down on both positions. "Time to go," Jake called back. He put 6 more rounds into the canyon, forcing Hayes's men to keep their heads down, then scrambled back from his position. Ayanna was already moving, bounding from rock to rock like a mountain cat. Jake followed, his cavalry boots sliding on loose stone, but somehow keeping their purchase. Behind them, Hayes's voice roared over the chaos. "After them, don't let them get away." But getting away was exactly what Jake had in mind. Not running, not retreating, leading. Drawing Hayes' force away from the village, deeper into Apache territory where every rock could hide a warrior and every shadow could conceal death. They ran for an hour, stopping only long enough to lay down covering fire when the pursuit got too close. Always moving north, always staying just out of rifle range, always keeping Hayes's men focused on the hunt instead of their original target. Finally, as the sun climbed toward its zenith, Jake called a halt in a natural fortress of broken stone. Good fields of fire, multiple escape routes, and most importantly, the sound of many horses approaching from the north. "Your father?" Jake asked. Ayanna listened to the hoofbeats, her head cocked like a hunting animal. Then she smiled. "My father, and about 40 warriors who've been riding hard all night." Hayes's men reached the fortress 5 minutes later, strung out in a long column, their horses blown from the chase. They rode right into the crossfire. The battle lasted exactly 4 minutes. When the smoke cleared, Colonel Samuel Hayes lay dead in the dust, his grand uniform torn and bloody. Half his men were casualties, the other half running for their lives across the desert. The weapons cache in Devil's Canyon would stay buried under tons of rock, where Mankato's warriors had collapsed the cave entrance. The silver mine would remain on Apache land, protected by federal treaty and the kind of justice that came from the barrel of a gun. Jake found himself standing over Hayes' body, the smoking Winchester still in his hands.